All right, let's see if we can graph some of the trickier sine and cosine graphs. First, let's make sure we understand what each part of the equation does. So I've got f of x equals -2 cosine 1/3 quantity x plus pi minus 4. Okay. What is the amplitude of this graph? Well, the amplitude is the absolute value of a. A is -2. The absolute value of -2 is 2. So the amplitude of this graph is 2. This graph has a vertical shift. The vertical shift is the number on the outside. In this case, it's going to be -4, which means I'm going to go down 4. The period is 2 pi over b. I'm in the proper form. The period is going to be 2 pi over 1/3, which is the same thing as 2 pi times 3 over 1. The period of this graph is going to be 6 pi. It's going to take 6 pi units before it completes a cycle. And finally, the phase shift, remember things in parentheses are opposite of what you would think. X plus pi tells me that this graph is shifted pi units to the left. Okay, let's try another one real quick before we actually start to graph. Try to get rid of all that. That was crazy. All right, let's do f of x is equal to 2/5 sine 2x minus pi plus 1. First thing I want you to do, be really, really careful because this isn't really in the standard form yet. Notice that my coefficient of x here is 2, where in standard form the coefficient is 1. I've got to be real careful to write this correctly, so I'm going to write this as 2/5 the sine of 2 times quantity x minus. Now, what am I going to multiply 2 by to give me pi? It's going to have to be pi over 2 plus 1. Notice that 2 times quantity x minus pi over 2 is 2x minus pi, and that'll help me when I try and put this into standard form. First of all, the amplitude is the a value of 2/5. My vertical shift is up 1. My period is 2 pi over b. b is 2. 2 pi over 2 is pi. So I complete one complete cycle in pi. My phase shift is going to be pi over 2 to the right. Okay. Now that we've got those, let's apply those to actually graphing one or two of these functions. Let's see if we can graph f of x is equal to -3 minus 3 sine x plus pi over 2. Once again, they didn't put this exactly in the form we're used to, so I'm going to move it over just so it looks better for us. This is the same thing as -3 sine x plus pi over 2 minus 3. Okay. When I'm graphing the sine wave, remember the first thing that I always look for is the period. Okay, in this case, my a value is 1. My period is actually 2 pi. So I'm going to come out here to 2 pi. Half of 2 pi is pi. Pi over 2, 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. Going backwards, this is going to be -2 pi, negative pi over 2, and -3 pi over 2. That takes care of the period. My line of oscillation is going down 3. So I'm going to come down here to -3. Y equals -3 is going to be my line of oscillation. The amplitude is the absolute value of -3. My amplitude is 3. That means I'm going to go up to 0 and I'm going to go down to -6. Okay. Then, actually, I'll usually do these backwards here. I'm going to see, is this wave a sine wave or is it a cosine wave? In this particular case, it's a sine wave, but it's a negative sine wave. I'm going to put these dots down here, but they're going to change when I do my phase shift. In a regular sine wave, I would have started at the line of oscillation, -3. Because it's negative, I would have gone down to -6, back to -3, up to 0, and then back to -3, and I would have drawn it this way. However, we've shifted this graph. Notice that we've shifted this graph pi over 2 to the left. Okay? And the way I think about it is how many tick marks is pi over 2? Well, in this particular case, pi over 2 is just one tick mark. We're moving everything one tick mark to the left. So what used to be the line of oscillation here at the y-axis is now going to move over, but everything else is going to stay the same. It's a negative sine wave, so I'm going to go down, back up, all the way up to my peak, back down to my line of oscillation, back to the trough. This actually now looks like a negative cosine wave. Okay, going on this side, I'm at the trough, so I go back to the line of oscillation, up to the peak, back to the line of oscillation, and then back down to the trough. There's my graph, f of x equals -3 minus 3 sine x plus pi over 2. Let's take a look at maybe one more. Should only take me an hour and a half to erase all this. All right, how about f of x is equal to 2 cosine x minus pi over 2 plus 2. All right, once again, first thing I'm going to look for is my period. Well, my period in this particular case, once again, the a value is 1. My period is going to go out to 2 pi. Doesn't always work that way, but it has in my two examples. Let's cut that in half. Pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, negative pi over 2, negative 3 pi over 2, set up and ready to begin. My line of oscillation is up 2, so at y equals 2, I have my line of oscillation. My amplitude is the absolute value of 2, which is 2, so I'm going to go all the way up to 4, back down to 0. And this is a cosine wave, so it would normally start at the peak. Cosine waves start at the peak, negative cosine waves start at the trough. Sine waves always start at the line of oscillation. Okay? So I'm about to start at the peak, except for the fact that my graph is going to move pi over 2 to the right. Once again, that's just one tick mark to the right. So everything's going to move over one tick mark. I'm actually going to start my peak here, line of oscillation, trough, back to the line of oscillation. Since I'm at my peak, I was coming down, further down, back up to the peak and back. And when I finish this wave, it actually just looks like a sine wave. It actually begins at the line of oscillation and goes up. With each of these pieces, find that period, pull your period, make your period go to the end, cut it in half again, no matter what it is. Once you've got your amplitude and your line of oscillation, when it comes time for the phase shift, normally almost every time that I would give this to you, it's going to match up with one of the tick marks, and just see how many tick marks you need to move over. Slide them over that many, graph it. Hopefully it'll come out real well. Once again, any questions, feel free to ask me.